Set deep in the heart of the lush, labyrinthine jungles of Mesoamerica, where sunlight struggles to pierce the dense canopy and the air hangs heavy with humidity and the scent of earth, the Maya civilization flourished, brilliant, enigmatic, and terrifying. To the casual eye, the Maya world might appear as a picture of harmony: monumental pyramids rising above the treetops, intricate carvings on stone stele, markets teeming with maize and obsidian, and the rhythm of everyday life unfolding in a carefully ordered society. But beneath this veneer of sophistication and beauty, an undercurrent of fear pulsed through the heart of their culture, a fear cultivated deliberately, engineered with precision, and wielded as a weapon to control not just bodies, but the very souls of men, women, and children alike. The Maya were masters of manipulating perception. They understood, with unnerving clarity, that terror could be as potent a tool as devotion. Their priests, adorned in vibrant feathers and sacred paints, moved like shadows through ceremonial plazas, orchestrating sound and silence with a skill that blurred the line between the divine and the mortal, the real and the imagined. Drums thundered like the heartbeat of the cosmos, flutes wailed like spirits caught in torment, and the echoes of ritual chants reverberated through stone corridors, designed intentionally to disorient, to awe, and to terrify. Every note, every pause, every whispered incantation carried meaning, shaping human emotion as skillfully as an artist shapes clay. Imagine, for a moment, standing at the foot of a massive temple just as dusk falls. The dense green canopy above twists and shimmers in the dying light, shadows lengthening into grotesque shapes across the carved steps. Somewhere deep in the temple's inner sanctum, a priest begins the ritual. At first, it is barely audible, the low hum of a drum, a single flute note, eerie and piercing. Then the rhythm grows, faster, louder, until it vibrates through the very bones of those who watch. Hearts pound in synchronized fear, and the line between mortal and divine blurs. The Maya believed that fear could open the soul, that it could render the human spirit vulnerable to the influence of gods, demons, and unseen forces. To them, terror was not merely punishment, it was revelation, communion, and control, all in one. It is within this theater of shadows and sound that the most chilling and forbidden aspects of Maya civilization were revealed. Rituals of sacrifice, ceremonial intimidation, and auditory manipulation were not the work of chaotic mobs or unthinking superstition, they were the calculated instruments of a society that revered knowledge, order, and cosmic alignment, even in its darkest, bloodiest forms. The very architecture of their temples, the layout of their ceremonial spaces, and the careful positioning of drums, flutes, and human participants were all designed to exploit the psyche, to make the human soul tremble before the invisible weight of divine power. Fear, for the Maya, was sacred. Fear was law. Fear was a bridge between the living and the dead. And yet, this manipulation of the human spirit was not only about domination. It was about understanding the fragile and malleable nature of the mind, about crafting experiences so intense that they would be seared into memory, passing down lessons of obedience, reverence, and awe. The same sound that could summon terror could also inspire wonder. The same fear that could make a victim shiver could make a community unite in devotion. In this duality, the beauty of ritual entwined with the horror of sacrifice, lay the genius and the darkness of the Maya. In this documentary, we will journey beyond the polished surfaces of Maya civilization and into its shadowed chambers, where sound, fear, and faith merged into an instrument capable of manipulating the very essence of the human soul. We will explore the temples where echoes of terror still linger in stone, the drums whose vibrations once dictated life and death, and the priests who became architects of human emotion. This is not merely a story of brutality, it is a story of psychological mastery, cosmic belief, and the terrifying power of sound to reach beyond the body into the deepest recesses of the soul. By the end of our journey, it will become clear, the Maya were not only builders of pyramids and scribes of astronomical knowledge, they were engineers of fear, composers of dread, and masters of the human psyche. And in understanding how they achieved this, we will confront one of the darkest truths of human civilization, that the mind is as fragile and as powerful as any weapon, and when wielded with divine authority, it can be transformed into an instrument of awe, devotion, and terror. The Maya understood the mind with a precision that borders on the uncanny. They recognized fear not as a mere emotion but as a force, an energy that could be harnessed, molded, and directed. In their cosmology, the human soul was malleable, a vessel that could be opened or closed depending on one's experiences of awe and terror. For the Maya, sound was not merely communication, it was a tool, a weapon, and a key to the unseen world. The low pulse of drums, the high, piercing notes of flutes, the eerie resonance of conch shells, all were carefully orchestrated to provoke visceral responses, to unsettle the mind, and to awaken a sense of vulnerability to the divine. Fear, they believed, was a bridge between mortality and eternity. When properly invoked, it could make a person's soul susceptible to messages from gods, ancestors, or spirits of the underworld. The Maya priests, or Akin, were trained in the subtle arts of psychological manipulation. They understood that terror could open the doors of perception, that when a human heart races and the body trembles, the soul becomes pliable. Through sound, they could summon panic, awe, or reverence at will, bending entire populations to their spiritual and political will without the use of physical force. Imagine a ceremonial plaza at night, under a blanket of stars so bright they seem to bleed into the dense canopy. A crowd gathers, their shadows flickering against the jagged stone of a pyramid. A single drum begins to beat, slow and rhythmic, almost imperceptible at first. The hum resonates not only through the air but through the ground itself, vibrating through the bones of those who stand upon it. The sound grows, joined by the keening wail of flutes and the hollow roar of a conch. Each note is carefully timed to exploit human perception, silence followed by sudden sound, discordant intervals that make the mind race, rhythms that mimic the heartbeat of a terrified human. The audience begins to feel what the priests intend: unease, tension, and a gnawing anticipation of what will happen next. The Maya used what modern psychologists might call sensory manipulation to terrifying effect. They knew how to overload the senses, combining visual spectacle with auditory terror. Torches cast moving shadows that danced across walls, creating grotesque and exaggerated shapes of gods and monsters. Echoing sounds from hidden chambers made it seem as though spirits were moving unseen through the crowd. The combination of fear and sound created a hallucinatory experience that blurred the line between the natural and the supernatural. To witness a Maya ritual was to be caught in a web of perception, where reality and imagination merged under the control of the priesthood. This mastery of fear was not reserved solely for entertainment or religious devotion. It was a calculated method of control. Fear ensured obedience, reinforced social hierarchies, and maintained the sacred order. A villager who had witnessed a ritual would not merely remember the spectacle, they would feel the lingering terror in their chest for days, a psychological imprint ensuring they respected authority and the gods. Children learned from the shadows of fear as much as from the lessons of their elders. By turning the intangible force of emotion into a tool, the Maya elevated fear into an instrument as potent as the sword or spear. Yet, the Maya's use of fear went beyond social manipulation. They believed that terror could open the mind to spiritual truths, that the soul could only truly commune with the divine when stripped of its mortal certainties. The soundscape of their rituals, carefully composed drums, flutes, rattles, and chants, was designed to evoke an altered state of consciousness, where the lines between life and death, mortal and God, dissolved into something terrifying and magnificent. Fear became a pathway to revelation, a conduit through which humans could glimpse the vast, unknowable forces that govern the cosmos. Consider the psychological toll on a victim of a sacrificial ritual. Bound and placed upon the stone altar, they would hear the rising crescendo of drums and the piercing wail of flutes echoing off the stone pyramid walls. Their pulse would quicken, muscles tighten, mind racing with visions of the supernatural. They would be acutely aware of the watching eyes, the priests, the gods, the assembled crowd, and yet utterly alone in the grip of fear. In that moment, sound was not just sound, it was a force that penetrated mind and soul, shaping perception, twisting reality, and controlling the deepest recesses of human emotion. Through these rituals, the Maya demonstrated a profound understanding of human psychology. They recognized that fear, when carefully orchestrated, could inspire obedience, devotion, and even awe. Sound was the key: low-frequency vibrations that rattled the body, sharp notes that pierced the mind, silence that created dread, and sudden crescendos that forced surrender. The priests were composers, creating symphonies of terror, and the audience, the populace, were both the instrument and the listener. By mastering sound, the Maya did more than scare their people. They manipulated belief, altered perception, and engineered spiritual experience. They understood that terror, unlike violence, leaves a lasting mark on the psyche, a memory that lingers, reshaping behavior long after the ritual ends. In the next sections, we will explore how this mastery extended beyond psychology into architecture, sacrifice, and the ultimate orchestration of life and death itself, revealing the terrifying genius behind the Maya's use of sound to dominate both body and soul. The Maya did not leave the creation of fear to chance. Their entire civilization, from the sprawling plazas to the soaring pyramids, was designed to manipulate the senses and guide the human mind toward awe, dread, and reverence. Their temples were more than places of worship. They were theaters of psychological orchestration, built with an intimate understanding of sound, space, and perception. Every step, every echo, every shadow was a tool, carefully engineered to amplify emotion. To the uninitiated, these sacred spaces might appear as architectural marvels alone, monuments to cosmic knowledge or human ingenuity. But for those who stepped inside during a ritual, the experience was far darker, far more intimate. It was a carefully choreographed journey into terror, where the line between life, death, and the divine blurred. Approaching a Maya temple at night, one would first notice the stillness, a silence so deep it feels unnatural, as if the jungle itself holds its breath. Then, faintly, the rhythmic beat of drums begins, almost imperceptible at first. A single flute cuts through the night air with a keening, mournful note. Shadows flicker across the steps as torchlight dances on stone, elongating figures into grotesque shapes. The acoustics of the temple, deliberately designed, carry the sound from hidden chambers, making it impossible for the audience to locate the source. The result is disorientation and unease. Fear, as the Maya understood, is amplified when the mind cannot anchor itself in certainty. When one cannot see the origin of sound, it becomes alive, unpredictable, and, therefore, terrifying. Inside the temple, ceremonial chambers were built to exploit these principles to their fullest. Narrow corridors, vaulted ceilings, and hidden alcoves created an echo chamber of dread. Drums could rattle stone floors, flutes could pierce the soul, conch shells could reverberate like the moaning of spirits trapped between worlds. Priests would orchestrate the performance with meticulous precision. A pause here, a sudden crescendo there, a whispered chant echoing from a concealed recess, all engineered to create a sensation of the supernatural. Participants, whether willing devotees or trembling captives, found themselves enveloped in a soundscape that rendered rational thought almost impossible. In these spaces, the Maya demonstrated not only architectural genius but a terrifying mastery of human psychology. The plazas themselves were extensions of this sacred theater. Open spaces, often framed by pyramids and platforms, allowed for mass participation and observation. The priests understood that fear is magnified in a crowd. Watching a ritual, hearing the same drums and chants that pounded and pierced through stone, one felt both dwarfed and trapped, caught in a communal tension that reinforced authority and the sacred order. The sound, the ritual, and the architecture worked together to produce a single effect: complete psychological dominance over all present. Imagine a large-scale sacrificial ceremony. The victim is brought forward, bound and terrified. They step into the temple, hearing the echoes of drums and chants cascading through corridors, the flickering torchlight casting monstrous shadows. Each step forward is a descent into sensory overload. The priests manipulate perception with astonishing subtlety. A shadow moves slightly before the eyes, a sudden change in rhythm catches the mind off guard, the wailing of flutes rises and falls in unpredictable intervals. The audience feels the tension, the crowd reacts collectively, and the victim is left suspended in a world where the human and supernatural coexist in an indistinguishable blur. Even the placement of the temples in the cityscape was no accident. They were visible from miles away, dominating the skyline and reminding the populace of the omnipresence of divine power. The pyramids themselves acted as amplifiers for sound. The stone steps carried vibrations downward. The elevated platforms projected voices and instruments across the city. A single drumbeat could echo through streets, through marketplaces, and across courtyards, instilling a constant, low-level anxiety that reinforced obedience and fear. The city itself became a living instrument, resonating with the music of power, ritual, and terror. The Maya also used visual contrast to enhance their auditory manipulations. Inside the temples, the brilliance of painted murals, gold inlays, and jade ornaments clashed with the darkness of shadowed chambers. Light and shadow worked in tandem with sound to heighten psychological impact. A sudden revelation of imagery, coupled with the escalating crescendo of ritual music, could make observers feel as though they were being swallowed by another world, a world where gods and monsters could materialize at any moment. Fear became immersive, enveloping the senses from all directions, leaving both the mind and body in a state of heightened vulnerability. Yet, these architectural and acoustic manipulations were not simply about cruelty or spectacle. They were deeply intertwined with Maya spirituality. The temples acted as gateways, amplifying the sacred sound to guide the soul toward the divine. Every note, every echo, every vibration was imbued with religious significance. The priests believed that manipulating fear through sound allowed them to influence not just the living, but the spirits themselves. The architecture was a bridge, a conduit, a stage upon which the eternal drama between gods and humans played out. The genius, and the horror, of the Maya theater lies in its subtlety. Unlike overtly violent displays, the power of their sacred spaces was psychological. The rituals manipulated anticipation, perception, and imagination. Fear was layered: fear of the unknown, fear of divine judgment, fear of death, fear of social consequence. Every sound, every shadow, every step was calculated to intensify the mind's response, ensuring that reverence and terror became inseparable. In the end, the Maya temples were more than places of worship. They were instruments, laboratories, and stages for one of the most sophisticated manipulations of human perception in history. They turned architecture into an amplifier of emotion, sound into a weapon of control, and fear into a pathway for both obedience and spiritual enlightenment. In these sacred theaters, the boundary between the natural and supernatural dissolved, leaving only the raw, unfiltered experience of awe and terror. In the following sections, we will witness how this mastery of temple, sound, and perception reached its apex in the rituals of blood and sacrifice, where the psychological manipulation of the human soul became both most visible and most horrifying. The Maya were not merely architects of stone, they were architects of fear itself, and their temples were the instruments through which the human mind could be molded, broken, and transformed. In the heart of Maya ritual, sound and blood were inseparable, intertwined in a terrifying symphony designed to manipulate the human soul. While drums and flutes had already been shown to unsettle, to disorient, to command attention, it was in the rituals of sacrifice that their power reached its apex. These ceremonies were not chaotic or impromptu. They were meticulously planned, every beat, every wail, every pause timed to maximize psychological impact. Fear, the Maya understood, became most potent when paired with the immediacy of mortality. In these moments, the mind teetered between awe and terror, devotion and dread, mortal comprehension and spiritual submission. Imagine a massive ceremonial plaza at sunset. The last rays of sun cast long shadows across jagged stone steps, turning the faces of onlookers into twisted masks of expectation and fear. A human captive is led forward, their limbs bound, eyes wide with terror. The priests position themselves strategically, orchestrating the auditory landscape. Drums begin as a low, resonant thrum, vibrating through the stone and through the chests of all who are present. The sound grows, now joined by flutes whose piercing notes scream across the plaza, each one timed to mirror the captive's increasingly erratic heartbeat. Conch shells blow, their hollow resonance seeming to come from nowhere, reverberating off stone walls and echoing through the minds of the crowd. The plaza becomes a stage, and the audience is both witness and participant, their emotions manipulated through a precise, almost surgical control of sound and space. The purpose of this orchestration was psychological as much as spiritual. The Maya believed that the soul could be opened, even coerced, through the intensity of fear. Sound, combined with the anticipation of death, could render the human mind pliable, making it susceptible to divine influence. In this state, the captive, and even the onlookers, became part of a ritual that transcended the physical, existing in a liminal space between life and death, mortal and divine. The sensory assault, the pounding drums, the shrieking flutes, the eerie echo of the conch, was designed to overwhelm, to break the ordinary boundaries of perception, leaving the soul exposed and impressionable. It was in this crucible of sound and fear that the true horror of the Maya's ritual art emerged. As the ceremony unfolded, the victim's terror was amplified, mirrored by the orchestrated reactions of the crowd. Their body trembled with anticipation, their minds spinning with visions conjured by sound and shadow. The priests, fully aware of the human mind's susceptibility, used pauses, crescendos, and sudden changes in rhythm to manipulate the captive's perception of time. Seconds stretched into eternities, a psychological torture that made the mortal coil feel unbearably fragile. Every heartbeat, every shiver, every gasp was amplified by the sonic architecture of the temple and plaza, making the ritual a shared yet deeply personal experience of terror. Human sacrifice, horrific as it was more than an act of violence. It was a conduit for control. The Maya believed that the shedding of blood was a form of communication with the gods, an offering that ensured cosmic balance. Yet the psychological dimension of the ritual was equally important. Fear, carefully calibrated and orchestrated through sound, ensured that the population internalized both the power of the priesthood and the omnipresence of divine authority. One did not need to witness every sacrifice personally. The knowledge that such ceremonies occurred, amplified by sound and ritual, instilled obedience, reverence, and awe throughout the society. Consider the experience of a single victim, bound atop a stone altar, drums and flutes cascading around them, the air thick with smoke, the torchlight casting monstrous shadows across carved stone faces. Their pulse races, every nerve ending screaming, every sense heightened. The mind becomes a storm of anticipation and dread. And then, just as the moment of climax approaches, the priests may halt the music suddenly, leaving a silence so complete it feels as though the world itself has vanished. The sudden absence of sound, after such a sensory onslaught, is a terror unto itself, a void in which the mind scrambles for anchors and finds none. The victim's soul, exposed and trembling, becomes a canvas for divine will, the terror leaving an imprint that outlives the body. The orchestration of sound was complemented by visual and spatial manipulation. Victims were often positioned so that the shadows of priests and ceremonial tools danced across the altar in grotesque, exaggerated forms. Drums placed in recesses made it seem as though the very stones themselves were alive, resonating with the rhythm of the human heart in fear. Flutes, hidden behind carvings or in the upper reaches of platforms, created a sense of dislocation. The music came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The combination of auditory and visual terror produced a psychological environment in which the human mind could not distinguish between reality and the supernatural, reinforcing the perception that the gods were actively present, watching and judging. This chilling combination of sound, space, and ritual culminated in moments that were both horrifying and awe-inspiring. The Maya were not content with simple acts of violence. They sought to create experiences that would imprint themselves on the mind of the victim, the observer, and the community alike. Fear was layered, immediate, visceral terror for the captive, vicarious dread and awe for the crowd, and a long-lasting psychological reminder of divine authority and cosmic order. These ceremonies were simultaneously punitive, devotional, and performative, designed to control the human psyche at its most fundamental level. The genius of this system lies in its subtlety. By engaging multiple senses and manipulating perception, the Maya transformed sacrifice into an instrument of psychological dominance. Fear, orchestrated through sound and amplified by space, became a tool for shaping society. It ensured obedience, reinforced hierarchy, and maintained the sacred order without requiring constant physical enforcement. Every beat of a drum, every piercing note of a flute, every echoing blast of a conch was a reminder of the precariousness of human life and the supremacy of divine will. In essence, the Maya did more than terrify, they engineered terror. The rituals of blood and sound were a symphony in which every participant, from the priest to the audience to the victim, played a role. The goal was not merely to witness death but to experience fear so profoundly that it reshaped the mind and soul, leaving an indelible imprint that would echo long after the final note faded. Fear became a bridge between the mortal and divine, a tool of control, and a method of communion. Through sound, through ritual, through the orchestrated terror of sacrifice, the Maya achieved a psychological mastery that is as fascinating as it is horrifying. In the following sections, we will explore how this orchestration of sound and fear extended beyond the ceremonial plaza, into the very structure of society, the power of the priesthood, and the mechanisms of social control that allowed the Maya to harness terror as both a spiritual and political instrument. The fusion of sound, fear, and human life itself reveals not only the ingenuity of the Maya but also one of the darkest chapters in the history of human civilization, a story in which the mind was as much a battlefield as the physical world. The priests of the Maya were more than spiritual leaders. They were masters of the human mind, architects of fear, and orchestrators of both devotion and terror. To the untrained eye, they were figures of ritual and ceremony, draped in elaborate headdresses of feathers, painted in vibrant pigments, carrying obsidian blades and ritual staffs. But behind this spectacle lay a chilling psychological acumen. These men understood the mechanics of fear, the ways sound could unsettle, how silence could paralyze, and how anticipation could break the human spirit. They were not merely intermediaries between the mortal and the divine. They were manipulators of perception, controlling communities through the invisible yet palpable force of terror. Training for a priest was rigorous, extending beyond the mastery of ritual and astronomical knowledge. They learned the intricate timing of drums and flutes, the ways in which sound waves could resonate through stone and earth to reach the deepest recesses of the human body. They studied human behavior, observing how fear altered pulse, respiration, and muscle tension, and how it could induce psychological surrender without a single drop of blood being spilled. Through this understanding, the Maya priesthood could manipulate both the minds of individuals and the collective psyche of entire cities, wielding terror as both a spiritual and political tool. Consider a typical temple ritual. A priest steps onto the platform, the gathered populace watching, the captive trembling on the altar below. Every movement is calculated. A drum beats slowly at first, echoing through the temple corridors, vibrating through the bones of all present. A flute pierces the air, a single high-pitched note that seems to originate from nowhere. The priest observes the reactions of the crowd, the tensing of muscles, the widening of eyes, the subtle shifts in body language. Then, with deliberate timing, the rhythm accelerates, the music crescendos, and the victim's heart races in sync with the orchestrated terror. In these moments, the priests demonstrate their ability to choreograph human emotion, to shape experience in ways both terrifying and sublime. The psychological dominion of the priests extended beyond the ceremonial space. Their authority was reinforced by social and religious hierarchy, making fear a mechanism of governance as well as devotion. Villagers knew that the priesthood had the power to interpret divine will, to punish the disobedient, and to orchestrate death with an almost theatrical precision. Even those who never witnessed a sacrifice directly felt its shadow in their lives. The knowledge that priests could summon fear and manipulate perception through sound, ritual, and architecture created a pervasive, low-level anxiety that maintained social cohesion and obedience. Fear, in this sense, was both omnipresent and invisible, a silent force shaping behavior at every level of Maya society. The priests were also the keepers of forbidden knowledge, guardians of the secrets that bridged the human and divine. They understood not only the physical and psychological impact of sound but also the metaphysical implications. In Maya cosmology, fear opened the soul to spiritual influence. A mind dominated by terror became receptive to divine messages, a vessel for the gods to communicate, judge, or demand tribute. By controlling fear, the priests controlled access to the sacred. They could amplify faith, induce submission, and enforce cosmic order, all without wielding conventional power. Their dominion was subtle, yet absolute, and it extended into every ritual, every prayer, and every public spectacle. The priest's influence also manifested in the performance of spectacle itself. Rituals were designed with theatrical precision, combining sound, light, and motion to produce maximum psychological impact. Shadowed corridors, flickering torchlight, and echoing drums created an immersive environment where perception was manipulated at every level. The priests became directors of human emotion, choreographing terror with a sophistication that modern psychologists would recognize as deliberate conditioning. A single pause, a sudden crescendo, a whispered chant from a hidden chamber, each element was calculated to heighten anxiety, to blur the line between mortal and divine, and to leave both victim and audience in a state of heightened vulnerability. Even beyond individual rituals, priests maintained control over the collective imagination of their communities. Stories of divine retribution, of spirits responding to sound, and of sacrifices that shaped the will of the gods reinforced their authority. The populace internalized these narratives, carrying fear into daily life. Drums, flutes, and ritual bells became symbolic reminders of power, their mere presence capable of invoking awe or dread. Through these methods, the priests extended their dominion into every corner of society, making fear both spiritual and social currency. It is important to recognize the duality of their role. While fear was a tool, it was also a means of spiritual communion. The priests were not sadists in the modern sense. They believed deeply in the sacredness of their rituals. The terror they invoked was designed to open the soul, to bring humans closer to the gods, and to maintain cosmic balance. Yet, from a psychological perspective, their mastery of emotion and perception was profound. They demonstrated that authority could be exercised through subtle manipulation of the senses and the mind, creating obedience and devotion without relying solely on coercion or force. One can imagine the long-lasting effects on those who lived under their influence. Villagers, soldiers, and initiates alike carried the imprint of fear into adulthood, their perceptions of mortality, divinity, and social hierarchy forever shaped by these orchestrated rituals. The priest's dominion was not fleeting, it was enduring, woven into the fabric of memory, culture, and belief. Their mastery of sound, shadow, and ceremony allowed them to shape reality itself, blurring the line between perception and truth, mortal and divine. Ultimately, the Maya priests were the true architects of the human experience. They transformed fear into a tool of spiritual and social power, using sound, ritual, and observation to exert psychological dominion over the living and to influence the soul's journey beyond death. They demonstrated a terrifying, almost surgical understanding of the human mind, one that combined artistry, theology, and psychological insight. Their power was invisible yet absolute, subtle yet devastating. A reminder that the most potent weapons are often those that cannot be seen or touched, but are felt deep within the heart and mind. In the sections that follow, we will explore how the influence of these priests extended beyond ritual and ceremony into the very laws and governance of Maya society. Fear, meticulously orchestrated through sound and psychological mastery, became a tool not only for worship but for order, obedience, and the maintenance of a civilization whose brilliance was matched only by its darkness. Fear in Maya society was never accidental. It was deliberate, pervasive, and carefully woven into the very fabric of daily life, extending far beyond the temple or ceremonial plaza into the laws, politics, and social structures that governed the civilization. The Maya understood that control over the human mind could be as effective, if not more so, than control over the body. A single well-orchestrated ritual, a resonant drum echo, or the sight of a sacrificial altar could ripple through communities, reinforcing obedience and social hierarchy without the need for constant enforcement. Fear became law, not written on stele or inscribed in codices alone, but imprinted on the psyche of every individual, shaping behavior at a subconscious level. Imagine a small village in the heart of the jungle, where life is dictated not just by the seasons but by the rhythms of ritual. A child grows up hearing tales of divine wrath, of priests capable of opening the soul to gods, and of sacrifices that ensure cosmic order. They witness the fear on the faces of adults, the hushed tones when discussing violations of social or religious norms, the silent compliance of those who have seen the consequences of disobedience. Over time, these stories, these echoes of past ceremonies, create a subtle yet powerful internalization of law. People obey because they fear, not just for their lives, but for their souls, for the unseen consequences that may reach beyond death. In Maya governance, the intersection of fear, ritual, and law was precise and intentional. The ruling elite relied on the priests to enforce not only spiritual doctrine but also social and political order. Laws were not merely civil, they were cosmic. Violations of social norms or disrespect toward rulers were framed as offenses against the gods themselves, punishable by divine retribution. Public ceremonies and sacrifices served as both demonstration and deterrent. The population was reminded repeatedly that transgression carried consequences far beyond immediate punishment. It invited wrath from forces invisible yet omnipresent. Fear was not incidental. It was the mechanism that ensured compliance. Consider the spectacle of a public punishment, carefully orchestrated for maximum psychological effect. A thief, a violator of sacred laws, or a political dissident might be brought before the community. The priests and rulers would oversee the ritual, amplifying sound and shadow to heighten tension. Drums would pound in a steady, oppressive rhythm, flutes shrieking in sharp, discordant notes that cut through the air. Shadows cast by torchlight transformed the courtyard into a theater of dread, each figure moving in deliberate choreography to elicit anxiety and awe. Observers felt the pulse of fear as tangibly as the rhythm of the drums, internalizing the consequences of disobedience without ever stepping forward themselves. The psychological manipulation extended beyond punishment into the regulation of daily behavior. Fear became anticipatory. Individuals were conditioned to anticipate divine scrutiny and social consequence at all times. The very architecture of Maya cities reinforced this omnipresent tension. Elevated platforms, imposing pyramids, and the visibility of temples reminded the populace of the ever-watchful eyes of both priest and god. Public ceremonies, punctuated by sound and spectacle, ensured that fear was not a rare occurrence but a persistent, almost subconscious presence in daily life. By blending ritual with law, the Maya created a society in which obedience and spiritual devotion were inseparable. Sound played a crucial role in this system of psychological governance. The reverberations of drums, the piercing call of flutes, and the hollow toll of conch shells became auditory markers of authority. Hearing these instruments in specific contexts, during a procession, a judgment, or a ritual, triggered automatic responses of fear and submission. The psychological imprint was profound. The mind associated these sounds with divine judgment, social consequence, and mortal danger. Even in the absence of an immediate threat, the echo of ritual sound carried power, subtly guiding behavior and reinforcing social order. The orchestration of fear as law was most evident in how the Maya maintained hierarchy and obedience without constant physical coercion. The priesthood and ruling elite understood that terror could be anticipatory, shaping thought and behavior in advance of any action. A child witnessing a ritual or hearing tales of sacrificial power internalized the lesson: obedience was necessary, transgression deadly, and the divine ever-present. Fear thus became self-regulating, a mechanism embedded within the culture itself. Social norms were maintained not only by punishment but by the constant, pervasive presence of psychological threat, amplified by ritual, sound, and architecture. The interplay of fear and law also had a moral dimension in Maya thought. Terrifying as it was, fear was considered a sacred instrument, a tool to preserve balance and cosmic order. The rituals that terrified the populace were not seen as cruel but as necessary. Punishment, warning, and spiritual instruction rolled into one. Fear was both a deterrent and a teacher, guiding individuals toward proper conduct, devotion, and alignment with the gods. In this way, law was not merely a civil mechanism but a moral and spiritual one, enforced through psychology as much as through edict or force. The long-term effect of this psychological governance was profound. Individuals internalized the principles of obedience, reverence, and spiritual responsibility. Communities remained cohesive, hierarchies stable, and the divine authority of priests and rulers unchallenged. Even after a ritual ended, its echoes persisted in memory: the thrum of drums, the piercing cries of flutes, the sight of trembling victims, all reinforcing the lesson that law was not merely human but cosmic, and that fear was the thread connecting mortal action to divine consequence. Yet this system also reveals the terrifying ingenuity of the Maya. Unlike societies that relied primarily on overt violence or coercion, the Maya mastered subtler instruments of control. Fear was everywhere, yet it was invisible. It resided in sound, shadow, architecture, and narrative. It shaped thought, guided action, and bound the community in shared psychological experience. The power of the priesthood and ruling elite derived not only from their physical capabilities or numbers but from their mastery of the human mind, a mastery so complete that fear itself became law. In essence, the Maya transformed terror into governance. They demonstrated that control over the mind could be as absolute as control over territory or armies. Sound, ritual, architecture, and observation became instruments of authority, ensuring obedience and reinforcing hierarchy without constant physical coercion. Fear became both a moral and practical tool, an invisible force that shaped behavior and belief alike. The psychological sophistication of this system is staggering, revealing a civilization capable of engineering social order with terrifying precision. As we move into the next section, we will witness how these principles of psychological manipulation culminated in the most horrifying and infamous rituals of the Maya, the orchestration of human suffering itself, amplified by sound, shadow, and sacred ceremony. The fusion of fear, law, and ritual reveals the full extent of Maya mastery over both the body and the soul, a power as mesmerizing as it is horrifying. For the Maya, death was not an ending. It was a journey. Yet this journey was neither simple nor serene. It was fraught with trials, terrors, and divine scrutiny. The human soul, or Sichulo, was fragile and impressionable, and the experiences of life, particularly those of fear and ritual, were believed to shape its fate in the afterlife. Every beat of a drum, every shriek of a flute, every echo within temple walls was designed to leave an indelible imprint on the soul, conditioning it for the unknown world beyond death. The Maya believed that the auditory landscape of rituals did more than terrify. It guided, shaped, and sometimes trapped the spirit itself. The journey of the soul began at the moment of death, but it was inseparable from the rituals of life and the fears cultivated therein. Priests, as the mediators between mortal and divine, held the keys to this journey. By orchestrating terror through sound and ceremony, they could prepare souls for the trials of the underworld, or, in some cases, demonstrate the consequences of disobedience and sacrilege. The echoing drums, the wailing flutes, and the resonant conches were not merely tools of domination. They were spiritual instruments, designed to resonate with the Sichulo itself, leaving an imprint that would endure beyond the body's final breath. The Maya imagined the afterlife as a complex, multi-layered realm, populated by gods, spirits, and cosmic forces. The journey of the soul was treacherous. It could be delayed, misdirected, or ensnared by malevolent entities if not properly guided. Priests believed that fear, instilled in life through ritual, could prepare the soul for these trials. By exposing individuals to orchestrated terror while alive, they forged a resilience, or compliance, that extended into the spiritual realm. The same fear that disciplined the living also prepared the soul for the challenges of death, ensuring that it recognized the authority of divine power. Imagine a ritual performed for a departing soul. A captive lies on the altar, the drums reverberating through stone walls, the flutes piercing the air with otherworldly cries. The crowd watches in tense anticipation, but the ritual's true purpose lies beyond the mortal gaze. The soundscape is intended to extend into the spiritual dimension, guiding the chulul along a path determined by the priests. Each note, each vibration, is a signal to the forces of the underworld, directing the soul toward the proper cosmic order. To witness this, one must imagine sound as more than auditory. It is a bridge between planes of existence, a vehicle for divine influence. The Maya also believed that the fear induced during life could linger in death. The terror experienced during sacrifice or ritual was thought to leave an echo within the soul, a resonance that could influence both its journey and its perception of the divine. A soul that had trembled under the orchestration of sound and shadow was more likely to approach the afterlife with the appropriate reverence, awareness, and obedience. Fear was thus both a tool of life and a preparation for death, a force that connected the mortal experience with the eternal. Sacrificial rituals, in particular, were believed to have a profound effect on the soul. The shedding of blood, combined with the terror of orchestrated sound, was a spiritual offering as much as it was a display of authority. Victims' hearts were thought to emit a spiritual resonance that traveled beyond the physical world, reaching the gods and influencing cosmic balance. The priests, as masters of both auditory and psychological manipulation, directed this resonance, ensuring that the act fulfilled both spiritual and societal purposes. The victim's fear and the audience's terror became intertwined in a ritual that shaped not only the living community but also the soul's fate. But the Maya did not view this process as purely punitive. The orchestration of fear and sound was considered sacred, a means of ensuring that the soul's journey aligned with cosmic order. Priests, through their mastery of ritual, were able to guide souls toward divine favor, protect them from spiritual harm, and teach them the consequences of moral failure. Fear, in this sense, was transformative. It disciplined the living, instructed the spirit, and maintained the balance between the mortal and the divine. The terrifying rituals were not merely acts of cruelty, they were instruments of cosmic justice and spiritual education. The architecture of Maya temples played a crucial role in this spiritual orchestration. Hidden chambers, echoing corridors, and resonant altars were designed to extend the influence of sound beyond the immediate ceremony. The vibrations of drums and flutes were believed to carry into the spiritual realm, touching not only the souls of those present but also those who had already passed. In this way, the Maya created an auditory environment that transcended mortality, where sound itself became a vehicle for divine power, capable of shaping the fate of the living and the dead alike. Visual cues worked in tandem with auditory manipulation. The flickering torchlight, the shadows of priests and victims, and the painted depictions of gods and the underworld created a sensory landscape that reinforced the power of sound. The combination of fear, light, shadow, and ritual space left an indelible imprint on the soul, conditioning it to recognize the authority of divine law. This immersive experience ensured that both the living and the departed were aligned with the Maya's cosmic vision, demonstrating the civilization's profound understanding of the intersection between psychology, spirituality, and sensory perception. The echoes of fear were also a form of memory. Survivors of rituals carried these experiences into their daily lives, shaping how they perceived mortality, divine authority, and social hierarchy. The stories, sounds, and psychological impact of rituals became cultural memory, a repository of collective fear and respect that guided behavior for generations. In this sense, the manipulation of sound and terror extended far beyond the moment of ceremony. It became woven into the fabric of Maya consciousness, shaping both individual and societal understanding of life, death, and the cosmos. Ultimately, the Maya view of the afterlife and the role of sound and fear in guiding the soul reflects a civilization that understood the human mind with terrifying sophistication. Ritual, sound, and terror were not merely instruments of control. They were vehicles for shaping perception, directing spiritual destiny, and ensuring that cosmic and societal order were maintained. The soul, malleable and responsive, was guided, molded, and prepared for the trials beyond mortality through the precise orchestration of fear. As we move into the next section, we will explore how these practices, these manipulations of fear and sound, left a lasting legacy, how the terrifying brilliance of the Mayas' psychological mastery influenced not only their society but echoes across time, resonating in the understanding of human nature itself. Their rituals reveal a civilization that did not merely control the living but sought dominion over the soul, crafting a legacy of awe, terror, and enduring psychological insight. The legacy of Maya fear rituals did not vanish with the crumbling of their temples or the overgrowth of jungle vines. It endured, not only in the echoes of stone chambers and the silent glyphs carved into stele, but in the psychological architecture of humanity itself. The Maya had discovered something fundamental about the human condition, that fear, more than faith or force, could bind people together, shape morality, and define civilization. Their mastery of sound, ritual, and terror was not an anomaly of a long-forgotten culture. It was a mirror held up to the deepest recesses of human nature. When Spanish conquistadors first entered the Yucatan in the 16th century, they found the remnants of this once great civilization still pulsing with echoes of ancient fear. Even after centuries of cultural transformation, the rituals of sound and sacrifice had not entirely disappeared. Drums still resonated in hidden ceremonies. Whispers of forbidden rites lingered in the night. The Maya's descendants, forced to adopt Christianity under the colonizers, often concealed their old practices beneath the veneer of new faith. But fear, that primal, sacred force, remained untouched. The priests were gone, yet their invisible dominion persisted in the hearts and memories of their people. The Spanish chroniclers were horrified by what they saw: the blood, the chants, the echoes of rituals performed to appease unseen gods. They interpreted it as barbarism. But to the Maya, it was continuity, the maintenance of balance between worlds. The colonial chroniclers failed to understand that beneath the bloodshed and ceremony lay a vast system of psychological and spiritual philosophy. The Maya had not worshipped cruelty for its own sake. They had used fear as a moral compass, a cosmic regulator. To them, terror was sacred because it reminded humanity of its fragility before forces greater than itself. This worldview was complex, even paradoxical. The Maya saw beauty in terror, order in chaos. The same sound that made hearts tremble was believed to open the gates of heaven. The same fear that paralyzed the flesh was thought to purify the soul. It is this duality, fear as both destruction and enlightenment, that defines the haunting legacy of the Maya. Their rituals were not designed merely to dominate, they were meant to reveal. Through orchestrated horror, they sought to expose the fragile boundaries between the mortal and the divine, to force humanity to confront the abyss within itself. The ruins that remain, the temples of Chichén Itzá, Copan, Palenque, still seem to hum with this ancient resonance. Stand in front of the great temple of Kukulkan, clap your hands, and the echo that returns sounds eerily like the chirp of the sacred quetzal bird, a deliberate architectural illusion crafted by the Maya themselves. Even in stone, their understanding of sound manipulation remains astonishing. These structures were not inert monuments. They were instruments, vast, resonant tools designed to manipulate emotion, to evoke fear and awe simultaneously. The stones themselves still remember. It is easy to imagine the scenes that once unfolded there. The crowds gathered beneath the temple steps. The drums beginning to beat in deep, rhythmic patterns that seemed to synchronize with the human heartbeat. The sudden silence before the priest appeared. Then, a single conch blast tearing through the air, signaling both the beginning of ritual and the end of human resistance. In those moments, the physical and the spiritual worlds collided. The living were reminded of death, the faithful of the gods, and the priests of their mastery over both. That psychological structure, the choreography of fear, remains timeless. Modern scholars have come to recognize the sophistication of Maya understanding in ways early colonizers could not. The priest's manipulation of fear was not primitive superstition but an advanced form of psychological and sensory conditioning. They had intuitively discovered that sound could bypass reason and reach the limbic system, the seat of emotion, survival, and instinct. By harnessing vibration and rhythm, they could trigger awe, submission, or ecstasy. The Maya were, in a sense, early neuroscientists, though their laboratory was the human soul. Their mastery raises unsettling questions about humanity itself. What does it mean that fear can so easily shape faith? That awe and terror are so deeply intertwined that one cannot exist without the other? The Maya's legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that civilization has always depended on fear to maintain order, that even modern societies, with all their technology and rationalism, still manipulate fear to control behavior, inspire loyalty, and enforce obedience. The tools have changed, the drums replaced by media, the temples by institutions, but the psychology remains eerily familiar. There is a haunting beauty in this continuity. Fear, for the Maya, was never senseless. It was a dialogue between the mortal and the divine, a reminder that to exist is to be fragile, that awe and terror are two sides of the same truth. Their rituals, brutal as they were, spoke to a profound understanding of existence, that life without fear is hollow, that reverence cannot exist without danger, and that the human soul seeks transcendence through confrontation with its own mortality. Even today, the echoes of those ancient sounds survive, in festivals, in drumbeats, in whispered prayers that merge old gods with new saints. In every reverberation, one can sense the ancient rhythm of control and liberation, submission and transcendence. The fear the Maya cultivated was not merely destructive. It was transformative, designed to break and rebuild the soul, to remind humanity of its smallness before the infinite. Their dark genius lay not in cruelty but in comprehension. They understood that the most powerful prisons are invisible, not made of walls or weapons, but of belief, ritual, and sound. Through fear, they bound the mind, shaped the soul, and maintained the balance between life and death. They were, in every sense, masters of the unseen. In the silence that followed their fall, their temples reclaimed by jungle and time, the echoes did not fade. They merely changed form, surviving in the rhythms of the world itself. In thunder, in the crash of waves, in the deep, unconscious heartbeat of human civilization. Fear, as they knew, is eternal. It cannot be destroyed, only transformed. And in understanding that, the Maya achieved a kind of immortality that neither conquest nor time could erase. Their legacy, then, is not just one of blood and horror but of insight. A revelation that within the human soul lies a resonance that can be played like an instrument. Through sound and fear, the Maya reached into that hidden place, awakening something that has never truly gone silent. Their story is not a relic of the past, but a mirror of the present, a reminder that what we most fear is often what defines us most deeply. And so, as the jungle whispers through the ruins and ancient stones echo the sounds of ceremonies long past, the truth becomes clear. The Maya did not merely rule through fear, they understood it, sanctified it, and immortalized it. They made fear divine. The ruins of the Maya world are silent now, yet the echoes of their ceremonies continue to resonate across time. In the deep recesses of stone temples, the long-forgotten rhythm of drums and the piercing calls of flutes seem to linger, like ghosts of a civilization that mastered not just life, but the very human soul. What the Maya understood, with terrifying clarity, is that fear is eternal. It cannot be buried beneath moss-covered stones, nor erased by conquest. It survives, carried in the mind, in the culture, and in the bloodlines of humanity itself. Their rituals, designed to terrify and sanctify, to manipulate and awaken, left an imprint far beyond their physical civilization. The Maya discovered something profound, that terror, when coupled with awe, becomes a bridge between the mortal and the divine. The psychological genius of the Maya lay in their understanding that fear is more than a momentary emotion. It is a tool, a teacher, a pathway to comprehension. In orchestrating sound, shadow, and ritual, they transformed fear into something sacred. It disciplined the living, shaped the behavior of entire cities, and guided the soul into the afterlife. In every beat of the drum, in every echo bouncing off the stone walls of their temples, the Maya carved a map for the human spirit, a map that revealed both the fragility and resilience of life. Their rituals were terrifying, yet they were also illuminating, forcing participants and observers alike to confront the impermanence of existence and the omnipresence of the divine. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this mastery is its subtlety. Unlike brute force, fear orchestrated through ritual cannot be resisted. It penetrates the mind, bypasses reason, and etches itself directly onto the soul. The Maya priests knew this. They understood that terror combined with ceremony, amplified by architecture and sound, could make obedience and devotion almost instinctive. They were not simply enforcers of law or religion. They were composers of experience, psychologists of the spirit, engineers of awe and dread. Every ritual, every sacrifice, every echoing note of a conch was part of an intricate system designed to maintain cosmic, social, and psychological order. And yet, the beauty of their work is inseparable from its horror. The Maya taught that fear is not inherently cruel, it is transformative. It sharpens the mind, opens the soul, and binds humanity to the eternal rhythms of life and death. The same ceremonies that made hearts tremble also inspired reverence. The same fear that could break the spirit also forged devotion. In this duality, the convergence of dread and wonder, lies the true genius of their civilization. They recognized a fundamental truth about existence, that life is defined not just by survival, but by the emotional and spiritual landscapes we navigate. Even as their civilization collapsed under the weight of conquest, disease, and time, the principles they harnessed did not die. The echoes of their psychological mastery remain in the way humans respond to authority, to ritual, and to the unknown. Fear still shapes societies, silently and invisibly. Modern governments, religions, and institutions continue to exploit the same mechanisms the Maya perfected, the combination of anticipation, spectacle, and sensory manipulation to control behavior, instill belief, and inspire awe. The instruments may have changed, drums replaced by media, altars by screens, but the effect is the same. The Maya discovered something eternal. The human soul can be influenced, directed, and even molded through fear when it is artfully applied. Their legacy challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. We like to believe that humanity has evolved beyond such psychological control, that reason can triumph over terror. Yet the Maya reveal that fear is deeply embedded in the human psyche, a force as potent today as it was 1,000 years ago. They remind us that awe and terror are inseparable, that beauty and cruelty often coexist, and that understanding the human mind requires exploring both its light and its darkness. To study the Maya is to study ourselves, our capacity for devotion, our vulnerability to suggestion, and our unending fascination with the forbidden and the extraordinary. In the end, the Maya did more than terrify. They taught, they guided, and they immortalized the human soul through the orchestration of sound and fear. Their ceremonies were not random acts of cruelty but carefully calibrated experiences designed to shape thought, behavior, and spirituality. They understood that the deepest lessons are not learned through comfort, but through confrontation with the limits of our mortality and the mysteries of existence. In every echoing drumbeat, in every whispered chant across the stone plazas, there lies a message. Fear is not only a tool of control but a mirror, reflecting the fragility and potential of the human spirit. Standing today among their ruins, it is impossible not to feel the weight of their mastery. The silence of stone, the symmetry of pyramids, the echoing corridors of temples, all speak of a civilization that understood life, death, and the soul with a sophistication that still challenges us. The Maya manipulated fear to shape minds, souls, and societies, leaving a legacy that is both horrifying and awe-inspiring. They remind us that terror, when wielded with knowledge and purpose, can illuminate as much as it destroys. And so, the Maya remain not in the stones alone, but in the resonance of their lessons. Fear endures, awe endures, and the human soul, fragile, malleable, and eternally curious, endures. In this, their darkest rituals offer the clearest insight, that the echo of the gods is never truly silent, and that the human mind, once touched by terror and revelation, can never entirely forget.